20 seconds of silencio. Hello and welcome to this episode of Star Wars Generations. If you're listening to this, you are probably a member of the Star Wars Generations podcast. Let me start that again. Have you ever wanted to be in a secret club? Maybe it was a fraternity. Actually, let me start that one more time. Have you ever wanted to be in a secret club? Maybe a fraternity or sorority or an eating club or just the it crowd in middle school who sat at the right table? Well, friends, you are now part of that because you are now part of the Ethical Panda membership club society gathering group, elite podcast people, and you get an episode just for you. Today here on Star Wars Generations, we're talking about another book from the High Republic series in a central book for the phase 2. I can't tell you exactly what book it is in the order because there's 8 different orders that are out there, whether we're including young adult novels or comic books or audiobooks or things scrawled on the back of Star Wars boxes of cereal. But whatever it is, we're talking about the High Republic Cataclysm. And we're doing it with myself, Matthew the Ethical Panda, as well as Gela Natai, also known as Ahsoka, also known as Aaron McGowan, also known as the brat of the group, also known as the child of the group, also known as the clone defender of the group, also known as the clone thirster of the group, also known as the person most likely to burp right before I hit the record button, so that was not recorded for posterity, also known as the person who should cut me off at some point because or else I will just keep up thinking up names for her. So
I'm just thinking about how I want this intro every time.
okay,
I just want to hear all about myself.
That's
But to
fair.
members, welcome, cool cats and kittens. You've made it.
Cats and kittens, you're here. We're here. We're gonna have a good time. So Jedi Gala, Jedi Wayseeker Gala. Overall, and granted, we expect a lot of you folks have not listened to this book or read this book. Probably read. I just listen to a lot of things on tape these days. We're gonna give a not a full summary, but enough of an overview to understand what we're talking about. But just kind of top cover feelings. Aaron, what'd you think?
I really enjoyed this book. I mean, this is one of 2 High Republic books that I've listened to. I listened to the prequel Convergence, and then I listened to Cataclysm as well. And I love this version of the series, like this little 150 years before everything else. You know, the Jedi Order is a little bit different. It's fun also that Yoda and Yaddle are still there. So I was really excited to see these characters again. Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about Gela. I love her.
Yep. She's a young Jedi who meets a bad boy who she just believes she can fix him. So, there's a lot there to talk about.
That's exact. I am Gela, Natai.
Mhm.
It's literally me. Like,
But Ahsoka
but
doesn't
she
have.
did. She fixed him.
She did partially fix him. He's still in jail and still belongs in jail, but
True.
she did fix him. Who is Ahsoka's fix him? Because fix him often has a romantic connotation to it, and Anakin sort of is, but you can't really fix your mentor in that way. Is her fix him just herself?
I don't know. I just don't think that there's like she doesn't have a character like that, really. I mean, she's that way towards a lot of people. She always tries to like inspire and encourage and teach other people. But yeah, no, I don't think there's anyone that's regularly in her life that's just like kind of a bad egg that she has to keep like coaching. She's that person.
That's fair. Well, it's good. You might have a type, but it's good if you have a type that kind of like your ultimate favorite is the one that breaks the mold. That kind of makes sense.
We could also say it's Sabine Wren. If we're thinking more current day.
That's fair too. Again, without the romantic connotation, but we can fix them. Doesn't have to be that. So let me give a brief summary of the book, and also kind of the world in which is taking place, because we're now in phase 2 of the High Republic, as is common, it seems now for Star Wars, we went back in time an additional 50 years. The initial High Republic is set maybe like 200 to 150 years before the Battle of Yavin. This is set 50 years before that. We're in a time when there's a dual chancellorship. Think kind of like the two consulates that rule the Roman Republic. Um, one of whom is a woman named Greylark. The other is a Quarren man whose name I cannot recall, but I'm sure Aaron will be able
Chancellor
to.
Mallow.
Chancellor Malo, thank you.
Orin Mallow, I think.
And in the first book, we learned that we're now even further back. The outer rim is still pretty much untouched, as we discussed. The Chancellor in the first set of books wants to really like build connections there. We're just starting to build those connections. The outer rim is still pretty lawless. And there's this group getting started called the Path of the Open Hand. And one of the things that we learn is that the Jedi are not the only group of Force users. I need to look something up quickly here.
I want to quick insert this book is 150 years before the other ones. So we know for sure that anyone who's in these books will not be alive in the other High Republic books.
Thank you. I didn't realize
unless they have an extended lifetime.
That makes sense. Yes, thank you so much. So it's
Mhm.
even further back. And so so we find out at the beginning that there's this group called the Convergence, which is kind of a congress of different Force religions, of which the Jedi are only one. And there are all these different groups, and this thing happens. It meets on Jeddah because Jeddah is considered this very important planet to all the Force religions, which again, kind of ties into what we learned in Rogue One. And one of them is a group called the Path of the Open Hand. And the Path of the Open Hand really believes that the Force should be free, by which they mean is that nobody should control the Force. And they have a lot of issues with the idea that in their mind that some of these other groups, especially the Jedi, are corrupting the Force and are like that no one should ever try to push the Force to their will. That as they describe it at one point, you should collect the flowers that grow in the fields. You shouldn't garden and try to control what the Force will create.
Yeah,
And
and
so, go ahead.
just an example of like the way the Path sees it. There's in the Battle of Jeddah, which is a separate book, but same time period with the Path of the Open Hand. Salandra Show, a Jedi, saves somebody, and the mother of the Path of the Open Hand says, well, "You shouldn't have done that." And she's like, "Well,
Right.
I just saved your life." And the mother said, "You saved one life, but now there's like a deficit. Now somebody else has to die." Like that's the way that
Right.
they see the Force. Is if you manipulate the Force to an outcome that you want, the opposite will happen elsewhere, kind of.
Right. Very much so. And I have a lot of thoughts on them that we'll discuss to be sure. And so in the course of that book, some of the conflict comes up. There's also this conflict that's centered around something called the Forever War between these two planets called Iram and Aranoa. And if you're getting a little lost in the names, don't worry about it. We're going to be kind of trying to focus on the big picture ideas. The point is that there's this major conflict between these two planets, and as it turns out, there's sort of a young prince and a young princess of the two planets. And so one of the first books is this wonderful romance between the two of them. It starts with the ideas of forced marriage that kind of becomes a real romance, and they eventually try to bring some kind of peace. But what we eventually learn over the course of a couple of these books is that the Path of the Open Hand is trying to continue that war for a number of reasons. One is it wants to harvest some terrible resources on one of the planets, but also because it wants to draw the Jedi into more of these conflicts. And there is this epic battle on Jeddah that occurs, the same Jeddah that shows up in Rogue One many centuries later, that Aaron mentioned. And it's because the Path of the Open Hand manipulates what was this peace conference between these two planets. Terrible. They have an ability, it seems, to kind of drive Force users crazy, to cause them to riot and lose control, as well as to do terrible damage to them. This terrible battle breaks out. People eventually start to realize that it's the Path of the Open Hand causing these problems. Fast forward to this book today that we have. And what we have is a number of plot lines where actually, and so one last thing to know about all this, because it gets into some of the characters that Aaron was bringing up before, is that we meet a character named Axel Greylark, who is kind of a ne'er-do-well, just floats around the galaxy doing his own thing. He reminds me a lot of Chuck from Gossip Girl, if people catch that reference. But kind of, like, and this young Jedi, Galena Tai, kind of sees that he has something of a heart of gold, at least as she sees it. But he's kind of a jerk. He's kind of an idiot, and they're sniping back and forth, and that like you're kind of reading it in a like, yes, you don't like each other. Yes, we get it. Will you please just kiss already? Kind of a way.
And
Uh,
he has a personal beef with the Jedi. He blames the Jedi for his father's death. It was
right.
kind of my remembrance of it is it was similar to in the Clone Wars, the way that the oh shit, what are they called? It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
All we
Uh,
need to know is that
yeah. Exactly.
the
And
Jedi were to blame.
if you caught his last name, he's also the son of the chancellor. Which is part of why he's kind of a ne'er do well. Like, oh, poor me, mommy always left me behind with rich, all these money and no one to look after me. So anyway, and he winds up becoming part of the path of the open hand and joining them. And turns out he was always working for them and breaks the heart of our poor Gela. And so he's off to a prison planet. So in the course of this book, we have a couple of plot lines. We have people attempting to restart the war again between Aranoa and
Irem and
Iram. Thank
Arano.
you. Aram and Iram. Say it one more time.
Irem and Arano.
Iram and Arano. So we have that war trying to start again, along with our star-crossed lovers, quite literally trying to fix that. We have this question of what's going to happen to Axel, and he is able to manipulate people, particularly Gela, into thinking that he needs to be transferred by kind of faking being sick and pretending like he feels all this remorse. And in the course of that, he is freed by the path and rescued, and Gela feels like she's been tricked once again. And now kind of like this is now kind of a little bit personal for her, which her Jedi master is kind of like, calm down a little bit. No, jealousy and I need to get that man for breaking my heart is still an attachment. We don't want that. Um, and meanwhile, Yaddle is poking around with a young, not even quite a Padawan yet, but a young Force initiate person who is written in that kind of a way where she's from an alien planet and her ways are different, but it felt to me like she's very autism coded, in a kind of nice way of like she's incredibly obnoxious in some ways, but you also get like she has this very literal perspective on everything.
Yeah, her
Not
name
nothing.
is
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say her name's Sippa. And yeah, I didn't fully catch that, but it is very autism coded and just the fact that she's incredibly gifted for her age. And
Mm-hmm.
that's
Yeah.
something that Yaddle is trying so hard to teach her about how to like control that and not get a big ego.
Right. Exactly. It's not as an autistic person, it's not my favorite bit of representation in that kind of a way. But
Okay.
this is not my favorite book, and she's not my favorite character. But I think yeah, definitely the coding is there. Anyway, what this is all leading to is this other planet called Dignum, on which we find out that the Path of the Open Hand has been building its resources. A whole bunch of things gather there for what becomes known as the Night of Sorrow, where the public percept basically what happens is this sort of even more extreme group within the within the Path of the Open Hand, called instead the Path of the Closed Fist, reveals itself. They want to do war with the Jedi. They want to kill everyone who's force touched in any way whatsoever. And they have a plan to use Axel to sort of blackmail his mother, one of the two chancellors of the Republic, into helping them. There is chapter after chapter after chapter of fighting, during which a lot of these different relationships get tested. Axel starts to look even worse. Then he comes back to the right side. Then, there's a lot of back and forth, but eventually he does the right thing and kind of helps to save the day. Gela helps him as well, and the two of them are rescued by other Jedi. Um, and the Path of the Closed Fist is pretty much defeated, although it's revealed that some of the leading people of it are from the Roe family and from the Santeca family, both of whom become very important in the later Nihil, which has paths, which I don't think is coincidental at all. But most importantly, I think especially for later plot, as we'll find out, we discover that first of all that there's a lot of public sentiment against the Jedi, and that the Jedi are not as beloved as people think. Most people walk away thinking that this was kind of a, I'm going to date myself here, but for those who know Waco, Texas, in terms of like, there's a lot of debate in the public, I think, about how that started or whose fault it was, and certainly that the Waco people, the Branch Davidians, were not great, but it's often thought of as like the government could have handled a lot better, and a lot of innocent people died because of that. And we can discuss whether this is right or wrong, but the public percept that basically the path has created a situation where the Jedi are blamed for this terrible tragedy, where lots and lots of people die. And so it helps to start some of the negative feelings towards the Jedi, which I think we're going to start seeing in the rest of the High Republic, and then all the way down towards the Clone Wars. And perhaps most significantly, and not the only plot point we'll talk about, but a big one, is that in the course of this fight, it's revealed that the path has access to these creatures that quite literally feed on the force and force users. And it is by note the word Sith is never mentioned. There's nothing Sith connected to this, but it is clearly something dark side related. It is clearly something that is a huge threat to the Jedi and a huge threat to the galaxy. And Yoda and another Jedi named Crichton decide that it is so likely to inspire terror in everybody that they're not going to tell anyone. And so they not only don't tell the Jedi High Council, but they don't put any record of it into the Jedi archives. Which both sets up some great discussions as well as gives the author a big like, well, wait, if all this happened, why didn't the Jedi know about it when things like it happened years later? Well, here's why.
Yeah. The
Yeah,
creature
so go ahead.
I was just gonna say the creature's called the Leveler.
Mm-hmm.
And on that, it's interesting that you perceive it as like almost dark side related. I perceive it as just force hungry.
Mm-hmm.
Like it feeds on the force. That's how it survives.
Right.
And the more force it can get, the bigger it grows, kind of like the Zillow beast with electricity. Um but yeah, I saw it as I mean, I think it would happily suck the life out of anyone with dark side connection to the force as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't think it wants necessarily the light side or like people with good intention. I think it's literally just the hunger for that connection to the force. And that's why in this book and in later books, we hear it described as just like dread and hunger,
Yeah.
just this feeling of the end and no hope.
Now, there's two things here. One, and I admit, I think I found parts of the book a little hard because it does feel like the battle just goes on forever. But I thought there's two different entities, the leveler and then also these smaller things that are like the nameless creatures that are running around. Are they all just parts of the leveler?
I just assumed they were all the leveler because the only people who hear it referred to as the leveler, I believe, is Axel and then Creighton and Ada hear that.
Okay.
At the end of the
Right.
book, Ada's dead, Axel's in jail, and Creighton decides to never speak of it again.
Right.
Um, so I believe that they were the same
Okay.
thing because it was described as like a animal with like very scarce fur and like ridges spines along their back, and that's how they're all
Right.
typically described. I think maybe why it's like there was some smaller ones and bigger ones. It could be that the path has several of them.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding was that the initial one has grown as the battle goes on, and it's
Right.
getting more force energy. It's getting bigger because at first it's described as something kind of small and dog-like, and then it's described as possibly a human running all fours, like
Right.
something that's just hulking.
That definitely makes sense. And certainly to the first point you made, I agree. It's not that I think that Yoda and Crichton see this creature as in any way affiliated with the dark side. I think it's more that they sort of ascribe like the rise of a creature like the way this creature is being used and the feelings it can create. Because part of the thing is that if it doesn't drive you completely, into an aggressive rage, it can just strip away any feelings of hope. It can strip away any feelings of and leave you like it makes it very I think it makes you very susceptible to the dark side in some ways because it makes you unable to hold on to feelings of hope and joy and much more susceptible to feelings of anger and stuff like that.
Hmm,
But
that makes sense. Yeah.
yeah, but yeah.
Yeah, it's just
Well, so let's start with our beloved Mr. Greylark, and Gela. What do you love about Gela, and how does it all make you feel about Mr. Axel?
okay, I mean like book 1, obviously I'm going to fall for like the nonchalant bad boy, and then he turned out to be a murderer, and I was like, "No!" And the book ended and I remember thinking, "I can fix him." Like, I
Yep.
just thought at the end of the first book, I was like, "This is not the end. It's fine. He's still good, I promise, deep
Mhm.
inside." And then this book starts, and I'm having kind of the same thoughts. I'm like, "Ooh, getting back to Axel and Gela. Wonder what this is gonna be like." And there, she visits him in jail, and he's so contrite, and he's so violently ill. What they assume to be is because the planet he's being kept on has a slightly different atmospheric pressure, so it's a little
Mhm.
heavier on top of everyone. And they were all like, "Oh, I guess the pressure is just too much for his system from living on Coruscant high up the whole
Right.
time." As we later find out, he is so manipulative that he has taught himself how to not only fake sick, but for his body to respond as sick as well, with fevers,
Right.
vomiting, fainting. Like,
And
my guy is an expert liar.
here in a bit in his defense, he learned that because he was constantly being dragged to these political events by his mother, and he wanted a reason to get out of it, and so he taught himself to
Yes.
do that. It's still
Yeah.
manipulation and lying, but I have a little bit of sympathy for him as like the kid who doesn't want to be involved in his mom's political career.
Yeah, yeah, it was, and that's what a lot of his motivations are, is it just goes back to this childhood, basically a mother wound.
Mm-hmm.
Just this hurt that he wasn't loved by his mother the same way he felt his father loved him,
Right.
and that after his father was gone, he was just on his own.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I don't know. I think it's very interesting to see, and I like when we're inside of Axel's head because
Mhm.
he is so delusional. It's kind of relatable. He's so fucking delusional. Like when he escapes initially from Gela's custody, Gela and another Jedi Master, and goes with the path, he's like, okay, this is my time to like start something good. I'm gonna, you know, get some power here. We're gonna make a change in the galaxy. And like they're really hateful of the Jedi, but like I don't really fuck with the Jedi either. So like that's fine, I guess. But
Mhm.
he, as we find out towards the end of the book, has very intentionally been kept in the dark about a lot of things. That
Right.
is partially the mother's intention of manipulating him. It's also his fault because he's never asked questions. You know,
Yeah.
he doesn't ask questions. He does as he's told, slash, he does what he wants to do. He doesn't ask questions. He doesn't investigate. He didn't even go outside the room he was supposed to be in. Granted, I think they would have kept him in the room if he tried to leave, but my understanding is he just kind of kicked it and drank some wine.
Yeah.
So it's just very interesting to be in his head. And then the moment, even to that last moment, because Binot is a character, he's a Mirialan, and he's part of the path. He ends up being kind of like the forerunner of the Path of the Closed Fist later
Mhm.
in the book. But we find out that he and Axel met when they were young adults, like boys, basically, and became close and friends. And Binot went really far with the path, and Axel kind of, would hang out every once in a while. That's how Axel got involved with the path. But it's clear as the book goes on, and in Binot's head through both the books, he's become very much a like quote quote extremist. Like he very much believes the path, and he hates Axel. Like he resents
Mhm.
Axel for everything he is because Axel gets all the attention. Binot's been here for years, yet the mother prefers Axel. She prefers her chaos, as she calls Axel. And it was so interesting to see when that table was turned because, like you said, they try to blackmail Kyong Greylark, the Chancellor, into coming to visit them on Dalna to have quote quote peace talks. They're definitely going to kill her. But they do this by implying that Axel is in danger.
Right. Hold on one second. I'm hearing some like air noises. Do you have a cover for your microphone?
I don't, but I can stand a little farther back.
Okay. Yeah, try to do that and try to like, maybe just try and talk over it, and then I'll send you a website. You can get like a little cover for it for like $3.
Okay, cool.
Cool.
Um,
I'll go ahead and start now.
Yeah, so we, the audience, knows that Binot absolutely hates Axel. But
Right.
to Axel, they are best friends. Like
Yeah.
you hear him talk about Binot before things go wrong, and he's saying, like, man, like he's just one of the only people that's ever been there for me consistently. Like, I'm so glad we're doing this together. Like, I trust him or whatever. And just to see how wrong Axel was, that what happens is Chancellor Greylark steps down from her chancellorship. And she
Mhm.
says, now I'm going to come, but I will come to talk to you like as your mother, as Kyong Greylark, not as Chancellor Greylark.
Right.
And the mother flips her shit because everything that she needed was Kyong Greylark's power,
Right.
not her riches, not the person that she is. She needed the power of the chancellorship and the ability to manipulate that. Kyong knew that and didn't want to put that power into this group's hands that they didn't know much about. Anyway, so the mother in, immediately flips her shit, starts screaming at Axel, you did this on purpose, you knew this was going to happen. He is just as blindsided as they are because his understanding of his mother is that the job always comes first.
Right.
And so the idea that she would ever step down for him is crazy. Anyways, and then Binot kind of takes him into custody, and Axel's kind of like joking around, like, haha, and Binot just bitch slaps him, just fucking
Mhm.
backhand to the face. And Axel like sits up, like, what? And Binot just hits him on the other side. And he's like, Axel is just reeling from everything that's going on, so confused. And I just, I loved having his character stripped down to
Yeah.
like the very base of like, yeah, all these things you thought you were building for yourself, it was just based on your status. Like it has nothing to do with you or your skills, which is something that people tell him a lot. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, it's very true because he hasn't put effort in to be anything else.
Yeah, it's funny. So, like I said, this is not my favorite High Republic books. I think there's too much battle. I think there's too many character stories. I think though that the plot line of these characters that we're discussing, Axel and Binot, and these two maternal figures, and that is very much not coincidental. They're very intentionally played as like these two mothers who are kind of fighting over him, while Bennett is very much realizing like he has no maternal figures in his life and has never seen it, and just all the different webs and chains of relationships and resentment there is, I think, some of the best writing I've seen in the High Republic series,
Mhm.
and it makes the characters really interesting. And I really enjoy that in phase one, we get to see more of the Jedi. We get to see more of how the Jedi work. I really like in this that most of the characters are not Force users, or if they are, it's a pretty minor thing. And there are individual Jedi who are important parts of the story, but whereas like the Jedi, I think the Jedi themselves are main characters of phase one. Here, they're definitely secondary characters. And some individuals take the spotlight in particular books, but the Jedi Order itself is much more in the background. And I think that it just adds a whole other dimension to the story of we're talking about all this like political stuff that's happening not at the center of the Republic, not at the center of the Jedi Order, but out in the Outer Rim, out in the Mid Rim, out among people who we don't normally see a spotlight on.
Yeah, I agree. That's kind of nice. It's like planets we've never heard of, and it's clearly before the outer rim was really settled. So like communications are very hard
Right.
or impossible or controlled by the path.
Right.
So, um yeah, I agree. I like having our kind of quintessential story of the war between Irem and Arano having nothing to do with Jedi, and the Jedi are truly there as mediators.
Right.
Like, as far as that war, the Jedi are not involved. Once the Battle of Jeddah happens and the peace talks for Irem and Arano fail, and they realize the Path probably had a lot to do with that. They realize the Path has this weapon that's turning Jedi into husks,
Mhm.
and that's when the Jedi become interested and start internally investigating the Path. There's a specific scene, excuse me, where Creighton's son and Ada Forte ask, I believe it's Master Yoda and Chancellor Greylark, we want to go to Dalna. We want to do this investigation. Like, we're very uneasy about how things ended off with the path on Jeddah. And Kyon Greylark says, no, I don't condone this. I don't think that's a good idea. Like, I don't want to get involved in anything. I don't remember her exact motivations, but she was not on board.
Yeah.
She said, I think our focus needs to be on Jeddah and rebuilding what was lost there. And
Mhm.
Creighton says, I respect that. Then you can rebuild Jeddah, but it will be minus two Jedi.
Right.
Like for the good of our order, we're going anyways. Um, so yeah, I kind of liked that we got to see a little bit of like the first book was very much Jedi are just side characters, they're mediators.
Mhm.
And in this book, still very much we're focusing on a lot of the non-force users, but the Jedi now do have a bit of their own motivation
Right.
of what is this weapon.
Right. And yeah, and because here they're like they're not just focused on how do we help the galaxy and the Republic as a whole, but also how do we, this is a threat to us specifically, and how do we deal with
Mhm.
that? As well as I think that the the sort of breakdown of this, convergence of all the different force groups and the emergence of this group that really is kind of going after the Jedi directly is putting them on the defensive in a lot of interesting ways. And I think that let me ask you, how did you feel about the before we kind of realized that there are these huge bad guys and all that, the sort of critique that the path is making about the Jedi?
Hmm. I mean, it's hard because I it's been a while since I've listened to or read Convergence, so I don't fully
Mhm.
remember how they were portrayed in that book, and how they kind of spoke of the Jedi, but I did just listen to The Battle of Jeddah and then also Cataclysm, and the critiques somewhat make sense, but they're
Uh-huh.
just incredibly harsh. It's this
Yeah.
idea it's not just and I think that's when things go from the path of the open hand to the path of the closed fist maybe, is the path of the open hand is very, aggressive toward the Jedi, and they're very much filthy Force users, like, we in one book, one of their children is, like, in the market giving out flowers as and saying, like, "The Force will be free," and she gives a flower to a Jedi, realizes it's a Jedi, and is in hysterics, crying, screaming, so upset that she talked to a Jedi, she should have never done that, and so the path is very much against them, but not, as far as we know, is not overly aggressive to them.
Right.
When we get to Dalna and it's clear that things are more path of the closed fist, it is very aggressive. It's there's a scene where path members are getting weapons and leaving to go battle, and Binot says, "Here, you get this weapon for now, baseline, you kill a Jedi, come back, bring me their lightsaber, like, I'll give you a better weapon." Like,
Yeah.
just kill them, just slaughter them, and it's said throughout. I agree with you as far as the battle was very lengthy in this book. For me, it wasn't as bad since I was listening, and I
Mhm.
do a lot of driving, so that time kinda just, like, went by, but I do remember thinking when the battle started, "Wait a minute, there's, like, 4.5 hours left in this book, like, are we about to be battling the whole time?" And
Yeah.
we were, but like you said, they had a ton of different character beats to hit and a ton of different little stories to tell,
Yeah.
um so I was okay with how it worked out, but I totally understand that critique.
Yeah. I think this was the other thing I struggled with this book because and granted, I like when the main group in power is questioned, especially when it's a group that has some kind of a magical or special power that everybody else doesn't, and they're thought to be the, guardians of truth and justice in the galaxy or whatever it is. Um, and like, if you listen to my coverage of The Legend of Korra, the second Airbender show, which I think you've not seen, correct, Aaron?
No.
Okay. I won't really spoil anything, but like, there's a group in that whole world of airbenders. There are people called benders who have these special powers over the elements, and they're kind of in power in a large degree. And I'd always thought it'd be interesting to have something about like how do normal people feel about this, and is there any resentment or things like that? And they created a group that sort of felt that way, but then fairly quickly like painted them as so ridiculous, and by the way, their leadership is so corrupt that you were never supposed to take their concerns seriously. And I kind of felt the same thing here in that I, granted I'm fairly critical of the Jedi, especially by the time of the prequels, and I don't think the Jedi here should be as bad as the prequel Jedi, but I'm just naturally distrustful of any authority figure that just uh uses force as peacemakers, sure, but still, like at the end of the day, they are the ones who have these magical powers, that they're using those magical powers to control what other people are doing, and maybe that's for the good overall. But I think there are parts of society that would be naturally distrustful of that, as well as like the Jedi themselves. I think have some reason for that, and so I think I was kind of rooting for the path more in the first book, and by the second book to have them be so like I think what we're supposed to think is that the public walks away thinking that the Jedi were wrong in this battle, but that clearly we, the audience, should know that they're not, and that it's this like terribly unfair thing that the Jedi get blamed for all this, and that going forward, therefore, all the distrust of the Jedi is not actually earned. And I don't know, it just felt a little bit like they originally had these ideas of like we're going to kind of paint the Jedi in some critical ways, and this can be felt like backing off of some of what was established in the earlier books. So it's not a huge deal, but it's part of what I want to hear your thoughts on it as well.
No, yeah, that's valid. That makes sense. Ah, shoot, I had a thought. Give me a second.
Take your time.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, like the battle on Dalna, it's a very intriguing battle because
Mhm.
the Jedi don't they go into it having no idea there's going to be a battle. The mother knows the entire time, and so
Right.
do all of the members of the path know that there will be a battle and they're preparing for it. That's something that when Gela and Master Orin, who she's with, first land, they kind of come across people that are like, "We've got to go, we've got to go." They're gonna like people are like leaving us behind. Like, what are you doing here? You need to be in the caves or things like that. And just this sense of urgency that something is going to happen, but they don't know what. And it's very interesting because yeah, the mother kind of set the perfect trap to have the Jedi look as bad as possible. She did it on
Mhm.
her own home planet. They took all of the elders and all of the old people and the children and they put them in huts on top of the surface. Most of the fighters were in the caves. And they put them in huts just like kind of out and about so that basically so they would be collateral damage.
Right.
And so afterwards they could count up this many elders, this many defenseless children were killed and it was all the Jedi's fault. Um and so like she thought it out pretty well.
Mhm.
And I'm still a little confused about how a couple of things happened because suddenly there's just a lot more Jedi on the planet than there were before. And then
Yeah.
it's something where it's like when the first Jedi landed, they were like, that's weird. Sorry, when the second Jedi landed, they were like, that's weird. I feel like there might be other Jedi here. And
Mhm.
we knew from our version of the story that there was three different groups of Jedi. There was Gela and Master Orin. There was Creighton and Ada. And then there was Sippa, Yaddle, and they were with oh no, they were just with two Coruscant guards.
Yeah.
And then there was the representatives from Iram and Arano, Princess Ziri, and Master Charil Roy and Enya Keen. So we knew there was three separate see me saying that out loud. This book is confusing, guys.
It's a lot of characters.
I loved it and I followed it, but I can see how this would be a lot. But yeah, so we know there's three separate groups. And then at some point they're doing a battle and just someone comes in and they're like, I'm another Jedi Master who's here with other Jedi. And they're like, what? Or we
Yeah.
find out Master Yaddle came there and met with the rest of them because she was told to. She received a commission, or not a commission, a whatever,
Right.
saying go to Dalna. But we see her earlier in the book talk to Yoda about something. And she's like, I'm on my way to Jeddah. And Yoda's like, we told you to come to Coruscant. But the connection's really bad. She's in the Outer Rim. Things get broken off.
Right.
And so then she shows up on Dalna and tells them, oh, I was told to come to Dalna. Nobody told her to do that. So then I'm wondering, knowing that the path has full control over the communications buoy in that sector, did the mother send out a bunch of fake communications to call in as many Jedi as possible?
That was sort of my
Maybe.
understanding, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was like very interesting. Um but yeah, the way they set it up and had it be so orchestrated is that it's like it definitely takes away the question in the reader's mind of is this right? Are the Jedi wrong for this? Because
Right.
immediately the Jedi become the ones who are helpless, outnumbered, overwhelmed, and being like viciously attacked. And
Right.
they are, as we see it, defending themselves,
And
which is somewhat true. It's
right. Yeah, and it's interesting how it's portrayed because the first attacks are like you talked about that little girl who was just so horrified. A lot of it's how much they were terrified of the Jedi.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of it is, just because how they're raised and they're taught to hate and fear. And so, you know, at first the Jedi have like 10-year-olds and little old ladies running at them with sticks. And it's sort of like you're being threatened, but really you shouldn't be using lethal force to fight back.
yeah.
But then like every 20 of those little girl then every 20 of those little kids has an actual blaster, and so
Mhm.
it's just this very confused, crazy situation. Um yeah, I think as much as I like the plot of like, the prince and the princess from those two other worlds and things like that, I think if you'd cut that entire plot line out, if you'd cut out a lot of the stuff with Yaddle and,
Sippa.
Sippa, thank you, and made this book a lot tighter and made the focus a lot more just on the Greylark story and the story of the Jedi and the path and all this, like, I think it would have been a lot better because I do think that these key themes we're talking about, Axel and redemption and what's happening with the Jedi and what's happening with the path and what does the path become, those I thought were all great. It like I was sitting down to do this episode with you and I was like, where in the world do we start? Because there's just we kind of have to not do a plot point by point discussion because
Yeah.
it's just way too much.
Yeah, and it doesn't really all line up. That is hard. It's like since this book is a very clear sequel, I think
Mhm.
they had the problem of, well, we kind of have to include the main character. Well, you don't have to, but I think there might be like
Yeah.
perception or feeling of you should include the main characters from the first book in the second book since there's only going to be the two books, just so that people can like kind of hang on and know what's going on. It sounds like your perfect version would be we centered around Gela and Axel. Those are our two characters from the past. We don't really need to talk about those other planets.
Yeah.
Which would probably also be a really good book. I personally kind of love like the princess and the prince because
Yeah.
in this book they found how to work together.
They do.
Because
They definitely
like
do.
Ziri is very headstrong and very much does things on her own, and
Mhm.
Fontu is like, "You always make decisions without me. Boo hoo." And she's like, "I guess you're right, but also you snuck into this battle when you were supposed to be in the hospital." And he was like,
Yeah.
"Damn it, you're right."
Yeah, and I will say I do really like that, especially from the perspective of, there was a series of actually, I'm not gonna go that way. I love a good romance, but I think that, particularly as someone who's done relationship counseling a lot, a problem I think I sometimes have with romance movies is this idea of once they get past the thing that was pulling them apart and they have the big kiss that brings them together, they just live happily ever after. And the fact
Mhm,
is that's not how it works. And so this book of giving us those two lovers together after they're happily ever after and seeing that no, it's not all wine and roses. And there are some hiccups, there are
mhm.
some issues. It's a nice additional twist on the story.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing is like for me, I don't feel there's none of these stories that I didn't want to hear, but at
Yeah,
the same time, it was a lot in one book.
yeah. I think it's a good way to say it. I think it's a good way to say it.
Like I was thoroughly interested and engaged in each story. But yeah, it's like I remember I was listening to part of it where Axel was very sick and they were like, "We think we have to transfer him." And I was like, I could the next chapter started, I was like, "Oh, I gotta know what happens." And then it started talking about Creighton and Ada, and I was like, "Oh, okay, that's fine." And then like 4 fucking chapters later, we were back to Axel, and I was like, "Finally!" But the
Yeah,
thing is, I thought to myself, "Finally!" But also I had been interested in each one of those stories and excited about it. I hadn't
yeah.
been sitting there thinking to myself, "When is Axel gonna come back?" But when we did get back to it, I was like, "Ah, shit, I was really excited about this."
That's fair. That's totally fair. Well, and so let's get back to that story as we sort of kind of wrap up a little bit. At the end of her journey, Gela decides that she's going to become a way seeker, and um, even though now it is pretty clear that Axel is like forgoing, that path and is fully back on the good side, and he risks his life to save hers and to save some other people's, he's still going back to jail. Um,
Mhm.
what do you think of the way those two character stories ended?
I liked it. I mean, it's funny, I hadn't until you just said that, I hadn't thought of it as their stories ending. Because I mean,
Mhm.
obviously, it's not their stories ending, but you're
Right.
right, I don't
In this
think we're
book, this
gonna get
chapter,
more
everything.
content. I don't know if they have any more content planned in this time range.
Hmm.
I was pretty happy with it. I mean, of course, I wanna see, like, my boy out and thriving, but, like, he did bomb, like, a wedding or something
Yeah.
crazy like that, so that's not cool. I think it was a very necessary part of his redemption arc.
Yeah.
Because if he were to suddenly come back, he's like, "Oh, I'm good. I've saved people's lives. Yeah." And they go, "All your crimes are pardoned." I feel like he learned half a lesson.
Yeah.
And a huge part of growth that we see in him at the end of the book is he's not even like, "Damn it, now I got to go serve my time." He's like, because he waits in the medical frigate until Gela wakes up and then has to leave within like 10 minutes.
Mhm.
As she finds out she's been in like a induced coma for a couple of days. Um, but he just says like, "Well, I've got to get going. Back to
Yeah.
jail. I've got to finish paying off my time and the other time that I accrued for escaping jail the first time."
Yeah, I really like the way it's done because, we often talk about this, like, was Darth Vader fully redeemed or not? Which I think is kind of a weird conversation because it's not like I don't think redemption is math. It's not like, well, this
Yeah.
act of heroism was 7 points, but your act of terror was 10 points or something like that. I think it's a long process. But I certainly think that, like, if Anakin Skywalker had lived and has escaped with Luke Skywalker, at the end, people would be like, "Cool, you're a hero for killing Emperor Palpatine, and we'll make it very easy for Luke and Leia to visit you in prison." But
Mhm.
you're still probably going to prison of some kind.
You still
And
committed genocide.
yeah, and, like, because he died, and then, like, because Kylo Ren died, like, often when a character dies, it's sort of like we don't get to have any of that further reckoning, and I really liked with Axel, he doesn't just get to die, he
Mhm.
lives, and there's a sense of, "Okay, we're a lot happier with you, and hopefully the prison system is gonna move to is in a rehabilitative rather than, punishment sort of way, but yeah, we're not just gonna ignore that you killed all these people and did all these terrible things." And for her to become a way seeker, I think also felt really fitting because I think she's lost her master. She's lost a lot of people who are close to her. And I think she's really had, and again, granted, I always sort of want to jump to the Jedi ideas of attachments are wrong. And I'm not sure, I don't think it's going that far, but I certainly think what she has come to realize is that part of why she let basically like Axel trick her a second time is that she never let herself really deal with her feelings for him because she was
Mhm.
so focused on, I can't have an attachment, I can't have an attachment, I can't have an attachment. Instead of saying, like, look, I obviously do have feelings for him. Maybe therefore I should let someone else make this decision. Or I should um talk to my master about that, help figure out that so that I don't let those feelings make that decision for me in some
Mhm.
way. Um, and so I think her idea of being like, yeah, maybe I made mistakes, but also the Jedi weren't perfect here either, and I should go off on my own. And it ends really beautifully with her saying that she's going to go off and she's going to go spend some time on Jeddah and meditate, but that she's going to stop at the prison again and visit Axel again to start that journey. Is a really nice
Mhm.
way of saying like she's going to go off on her own, but she's not going to try and deny the connection she has with Axel.
Yeah. Really quick thing on that. Jedi Master Orin, who she was with, the one that died,
Mhm.
Binot killed him with a poison glove, was not her like master. He was just
That's right.
a Jedi Master that she had been acquainted with, and at the start of the book was actually pretty annoyed with, and didn't really like being around him because he makes inappropriate jokes all the time. But she was like,
Mhm.
ugh. And at the end of the first book, she decided to become a way seeker. And
Oh, you're right. Okay, never mind.
at the start of this book, we see her on her way to Jeddah to begin her pilgrimage, basically. Do like a sort of a holy ritual on Jeddah and then go out into the galaxy. And that's when all this stuff with Iram and Arano and the path happens. And she hears about it and she's like, immediately is like, Axel, he has to know
Yeah,
something. Cause that's all she's thinking about, right?
yeah,
Um, And I think she becomes very aware. She is so bothered by this. And so she's like, jump into action. We're going to go visit him in prison and, like see what's up. And they're flying there. And the other Jedi Master, Orin, kind of, I don't remember if it was this time or if they were when they're flying with Axel after he left the prison under false pretenses of release. But he said, like, to Gela, you need to be in the right headspace to handle this, and you're not. Like, I need you to go meditate and sit with yourself because, like, you're not acting rationally. And I
mhm.
understand this has big feelings for you. And never once does he say, you need to back up. You need to, like, stop this. I'm going to take the lead. But he's very good about just, like, getting her to realize that she has to deal with her unfinished business. Because I think when she initially wanted to be a way seeker, she felt in herself I trusted this man so much, and I thought I saw the good person that he was, and it was all a lie, and he fooled me so bad, and I don't know how. I'm supposed to be better, know more. I'm supposed to be at one with the Force. And I think it's almost her running away, is
Yeah,
that she
I
wants
think
to
you're
go on
right.
this way seeker journey because she doesn't understand why that happened, and she can't reconcile why he got the better of her so much. And so
Mhm.
this book is almost like a story of closure for her, I think, is
Yeah.
being able to go back and revisit it, which is not often allowed for Jedi, i.e.
Mhm.
attachment issues. But yeah, I really liked that because then at the end of the book, she is actually ready for her journey as a way seeker. She's not running from anything. She's learned
Yeah.
a lot. She feels good about where she's at, and she just wants to go learn what the Force is to her.
Yeah, I think you're so right on that, and thank you for the correction. I think that's a much
Mhm.
better way of describing it, everything that's happening here. Yeah, it's a great story. So, what are any last things you wanna comment on from this book before we close out?
Hmm. Oh, Kyong Greylark is a fucking badass.
Yeah.
Like,
She, like,
absolute
flies
badass.
her own ship, she can fight, she wasn't the greatest mother, but also she had kind of an obnoxious son, and she's willing to, like, admit her mistakes and still be like, "Yeah, you still gotta go to prison, but I'm gonna be with you, I'm gonna support you, and I'm gonna fight like hell to take care of you."
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that was something I think that was a really important piece in Axel's redemption arc was when she sent that commission back. Not, why do I keep saying that? When she sent the communication back to Dalna saying, "I heard your message. I'm going to come to Dalna, and I am no longer the chancellor."
Mhm.
She comes on screen in pants and a brown tunic with dirt and grease on her hands and her hair in a messy bun. And Axel's like, "Who the fuck is this? I've
Yeah.
never seen my mom." He
He literally
later
doesn't
when
recognize her.
they hmm?
Yeah, he literally doesn't recognize her at first.
He doesn't. And I think like we hear him think through it, but seeing her willing to be so vulnerable and willing to give up the things she has worked for her entire career for her son is such an important piece of him understanding what love truly is, and that what the mother is giving you and what Binat has given you is not love. It is people who are trying to use you for their own vested interest.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, I liked her part was really powerful. I liked her a lot. Because she does have her own kind of reconciliation within herself of it's not just on him.
Yeah. No,
Like
it's very true.
I could have changed so much, and it's not that he is a disappointment, it is that I could have done better, and
Yeah.
I expected him to be perfect without giving him support.
And I think I really like that story because I do think that I'm often fond of saying blame is not zero sum, and I think
Mhm,
that's a subject we'll talk about a lot when we get to Rise of Revenge of the Sith, the movie we're finally going to be covering in the next few weeks. And I do think that there's a lot of ways in which Axel Greylark and Anakin Skywalker are on similar paths and have similar
mhm,
discussions here. And I think that I'm someone who definitely did a lot of screwed up things in my 20s. I never I never harmed anyone like that, to be clear.
yeah,
But I definitely was a screw up for a lot of my young adulthood, and I blamed a lot of that on my parents, and I had some pretty bad parenting in my life, and I also made the choices that I made, and
mhm,
I think you can look at that. I think it's this pendulum of, on the one hand, everyone's responsible for their own choices. Don't be a crybaby. It doesn't matter how you were raised, all the way to well, they were abused as a kid, they had this bad upbringing, they had this thing happen to them, and so nothing's their fault. And the truth is much more complicated. And I
mhm,
really like where this gets to, of her being able to say, like, because she doesn't say, "I'm going to sacrifice for my son," put my me in jail instead of him. She hasn't made the decisions he has. She hasn't killed people. She hasn't joined this group, but she failed him, and that's part of how he became who he is. And so she's going to take accounting for that.
yeah. I was very happy with how they tied up this kind of era
Mhm.
of the Arano, Irem, Gela, Axel story.
Yeah, me too. Me too. All right, well, and listeners, what do you all think? Members would love to hear your thoughts on this book. There's no bonus content because all this is bonus content today. We're just really happy that you got to listen. As always, all the ways to contact us are in the show notes. Thank you so much for being members. You are the ones who make all this happen. You keep the lights on. We have spoken.
No, really, I can fix him, I promise.
Of course you can.